Thank you, guys. Yeah. Well, good morning. Have you ever been dumped? In other words, involuntarily extracted from an intimate relationship? Whether it's... I was reading about this 35-year-old woman who had a long-time boyfriend, and he dumped her. So she had a pity party for about a week, and then realized, okay, I need to get moving forward. So she booked like a 1-week retreat at this retreat center in Big Sur, California. And while she was there, she met this guy, and they decided to watch the sunset, off of the coast there. Big Sur is about 100 miles south of San Francisco. And I guess they had these massage huts, so they were kind of in there, and the sun went down, and they were just kind of holding each other and cuddling, and it was getting very cold. They decided that they're just going to just fall asleep in there on the massage tables and stuff like that. Well, in the morning, they wake up and discover that there's a space heater there that could have been warm all night. And I've noticed that so many of us, when we're having challenges in our life, tend to forget that there is this spiritual presence, that can respond and give us whatever it is that we need. But we get into a mindset that, we just have to do things the way they've always been done, or just have to accept what's in front of us at the time. Now, for those of you who've read the preface of the book E Squared, I'm talking about the author of the book, Pam Grout. She described how she went through this experience. Now, we're going to be doing a book study group, for the next 2 months on the book E Squared. Even though if you're not reading the book, it's okay. Each of the Sunday lessons is kind of a standalone experience. But the book is written by this Pam Grout. She's a successful author and screenwriter, and she goes to Unity. She lives in Lawrence, Kansas, about 30 minutes west of Kansas City, Missouri. It's where the University of Kansas is, so it's a college town. And she decided, is there some way that I could bring these spiritual principles out more into the mainstream? And so she came up with these experiments that people can do to prove that spirit really works. I'm going to have Duncan put up, Unity's 5 principles. This is on the 100th anniversary back in 1989. We spent about a year just coming up with, how do you quickly describe what Unity is about? When we came up with these five basic principles of unity: God, you, thought, word, and deed. God is all-knowing, everywhere present, and God is good. You don't have to worry about God being bad or vengeful. And then you are a part of that God presence. There's a divine spark within you. It's just a matter of being aware of it and being ready to express it. Thought is that our thoughts do create. We have thought energy that we can put out there. And then word is that we can speak forth the word. Our vocal cords send forth a vibration that allows these thoughts with the divine substance to create what it is we want in our life. And then deed is that we do need to apply these principles in our life. Rather than just talk about them or think about them, just being willing to follow through on whatever guidance that we're getting so that we can create what it is we want. So Pam's principles are pretty similar. She goes through at the beginning here, the thoughts create our reality. Well, yeah, that's, principle number 3. There's a power in the universe that supports you in your every desire, and you can heal anything. Once again, principle number 1. And that you alone design your life. Our thoughts, our emotions, our imagination create what it is, that we want to have in our life. And she says there's this invisible energy field that's 100% reliable and 100% wherever it is you are. It works every time, just like the laws of math or physics. It's like the law of gravity. Okay, gravity doesn't care who you are. If I hold out, say, a pen and drop the pen, gravity's going to take it to the ground. In spiritual law, it doesn't matter who you are, but if you're willing to apply the spiritual principle, it will follow through for you. You don't have to be special. You just need to be awake. Now, I've noticed that movies that talk about magic, of course, the whole Harry Potter series, has a certain resonance with us because it's like, wow, yeah, there's something to this. Yeah, and there is. Things may not instantaneously appear through speaking special words from a wizard's book, but things do appear when we use our imagination and we're willing to fill them with divine substance. Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore started the Unity movement back in 1881. I'm sorry, 1891. 1881 was when my college was was started, so sorry about that. So 1889 is when they started the Unity movement, and then 1891 kind of officially incorporated it. But Charles Fillmore's writings, back then he was talking about this invisible energy field, and people thought he was nuts. But then, of course, over these 128 years, we've found that, yeah, quantum physics has proven that everything is vibrating energy and is affected by our thoughts and our feelings. There's a quote from Albert Einstein. It says, "Everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit vastly superior to that of man." And this book is full of quotes. There's the one from Michelle Longo O'Donnell, the creator of the Living Beyond Disease book. She says, "The way that we've been perceiving life needs to be rolled away so that which is true can appear." So our thoughts do affect what it is we're perceiving in the world. We create our own reality. And that's why sometimes, we can we can be witnessing the same thing somebody else does, but they seem to be perceiving it in a different way. I know when I was a journalist, the police would often talk about, you come to a place and you interview the witnesses. It's astounding. There'll be a common thread, but it's astounding the differences in their accounts. One of the challenges that we have in Unity is that someone will come into Unity, they'll discover it, they'll apply principle, it'll work, but then people start to rationalize that it's a coincidence or that it's a fluke, rather than being willing to truly accept that, yeah, this stuff works. The only way it can't work is if you believe that they don't work. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But Amy Lamott, the humorous writer, wrote, "My mind is a neighborhood I try not to go into alone." But yeah, we can actually rewire our brain. We've got these neural pathways and stuff. And even though we create these in the early years of our life, as time goes by and our body matures and, of course, our mind matures, we can basically erase the old recordings and come up with a new way of doing things, a new way of believing. We co-create our experience with this spiritual energy that is in us and all around us. And by using our power of faith and imagination, we can start to see what it is we want to see happen. And then we bring in the spiritual substance and it does happen. So, Pam talks about in this book, being willing to experience the demonstration of the field of potential or the field of possibilities, is what she calls this energy field. And we develop a consciousness, an awareness that it is there, and that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So the book has 9 experiments. So instead of chapters, they're just experiments that we can use to prove that indeed spirit does work. She calls each one of them a principle. So we'll be working on spiritual principles each of the next 9 weeks. Each of these experiments can be done in 48 hours, except for one of them that takes a week. But so it's, get it done. So our thoughts are things, creating this field of potential, or this energy field affecting it. And these waves can affect, well, I already said that, never mind. Looks are, a lot of times though, like I talked about before with the, the Harry Potter, just zoom. And say you're having a financial challenge, and you're thinking, okay, well, I want to see the financial supply come into my life. But then when we're done with our prayer, we go to the front door, open the front door, and we're looking for a basket of cash to be sitting outside of the door. And it doesn't work like that. Instead, it's a coincidence that something happens where indeed a check does come or or some sort of a a financial situation or an idea of how to earn the money comes into our minds, and we follow through on it, and sure enough, it works there, or we're guided to go someplace and see someone. But we have been created. You get on Amazon, and instead of typing in, whatever, something specific, you type in, send me anything you want. What do you think is going to happen? And that's a lot of times what happens, with spirit, with God. Oh, I just want to do God's will. God, whatever it is you want me to do, and God's on the other side saying, Bob, whatever it is you want me to do, just let me know. And so that's why we just need to get specific, and come up with, say, a deadline when we want to see this happen. And then when we bring our, like I said before, our imagination, our passion into it, we can create what it is we want to see in our lives. So what area of your life would you like to see improved? Is it your health? You're having a health challenge. Is it your occupation? Are you doing something that you don't really want to do, but recognize what it is we'd love to do? It wouldn't be great to do that instead? What about relationships? We talk about Pam, breaking up with her longtime boyfriend. But in addition to intimate relationships, working relationships, family relationships, what sort of challenges we have. And then spiritual growth, being willing to, is there a challenge there where you're not feeling that connection with God? And then, of course, money. Do we have enough money to pay our own individual bills and then our bills as Unity of Tampa? So in Unity, we teach we need to just look beyond the physical appearances, because whatever we focus on expands. So we have our physical five senses, and then, of course, we've got the sixth sense, that sense of intuition, where we start to open our mind to the divine mind and allow that divine download so that we can have the idea. We start to feel, yeah, this is what it is. This is what I need to be working on. Gary Zukov, who also has connections to Unity, he wrote The Seed of the Soul, among other books, says, from the perception of the five-sensory human being, we are alone in the universe. We can use our thoughts and feelings and consciousness to mold spiritual substance into what it is we want to have manifest in our lives. And the interesting thing about this book, and of course about Charles Fillmore, our founder, is we're using a scientific method. You do something and you get a reaction. It's a repeatable experiment. Charles Fillmore took this attitude of, like, if these principles aren't provable, then what's the point? If anybody can use these spiritual laws and spiritual principles, then we should all be able to see some sort of reaction to the prayer work that we're doing. So yes, we can get what we want, but like I mentioned before, we always get what we expect. So if we got low expectations, or if we're feeling unworthy, then we start getting results in accordance with that belief system. So how many of you have cable or dish TV? How many channels do you get? 400, 500, 1,000? When you sit down and watch TV, how many of those channels do you watch at once? It turns out that our brain is this remarkable processor. I mean, it seems like so many things we've created are based on our own physical body. So computers, processing information at a great rate. Well, neuroscientists tell us that we receive 400 billion bits of information every second. To put that in perspective, if you were to take 400 billion zeros, 12-point font, and print them in a book, you would need 600,000 books to hold those zeros. So to maintain our sanity, we start to filter out some of those bits of information. Have you ever noticed with an infant, where the infant almost seems to be off in another world, but then suddenly they might lock eyes with you and come into that sense of reality? So we have to get to the point where we can create our reality or our perception of this physical world. So we filter out most of this stuff. And we're told by these neuroscientists down to at least 2,000 or less per second so that we can make some sense out of it, which is, by the way, 1/2 of 1/1,000,000th of the percentage that's available to us of information. But we have to choose. We have to decide what is our idea that we're believing at any given time, and then things begin to start to gel. It's a drastically condensed version of all that's out there. I know Joseph Campbell in his Power of Myth interviews talked about the early psychological experiments with lysergic acid diethylamide, which is LSD, dropping acid. And so they would have volunteers come in and then, of course, observe what happened. And they had this foursome that loved to play bridge. They'd play bridge for hours and all that, and they'd be really focused on bridge. And so they gave them the lowest dose that they could of LSD, each of the four of them. They were playing this card game bridge for a few minutes, and all of a sudden everything seemed to come to a halt. They were just fascinated. It was suddenly the cards looked so much different than they ever had before, and the people around them looked so much different than they had before. And I know, growing up in that area, there was that sense of like LSD, some people would say it would just make you crazy. Other people would say, no, it opens up your mind to a spiritual experience. Actually, what it does is strip away all of these filters that we've put in place. Suddenly we're opening up to all of those other bits of information. Just those filters that we built just kind of drop away for a while. So, what are we perceiving, but also what are we missing? What else is available to us that we're just not paying attention to? On page 9 of E Squared, Pam Grout writes, the roads and highways of our brains get set up pretty early. When we're born, every possibility exists. She goes, let's take language, for example. Within every newborn is the ability to pronounce every sound in every single language on earth. The potential is there for the rolling R of the Spanish language. There's also the guttural German diphthongs. And as many people in language education are figuring out, the best time for us to learn multiple languages is like between the ages of like 3 and 7. Because that's when we're learning the English language. And I know when Carla and I were traveling doing prosperity seminars at all the Unity churches in the 90s, I got to visit this distant cousin of mine who I actually had never met before that point. We were in San Francisco, Carla and I, and he had married a Chinese woman, and they had their child, and they caught on to this back in the 1990s, and the kid knows like 6 different languages because he learned them when he was really young like that. And with her being Chinese, they taught her the Mandarin and the other Chinese languages and dialects. Here's a quote from the author Tama Keyes. It says, we live in a world that worships limitations. I'm going to have Duncan put up a slide, because Pam, starting on page 12, talks about the reasons that we repeat the unpleasant. And this is why we need to prove our power. So number 1 is we're not paying attention. We're not really in the moment, paying attention to what it is that's happening around us. And those of you who I've prayed with, I'll say like, okay, let's just take a moment now to let go of all thoughts of the past or all concerns about the future and just be in this moment. And then we can feel that amazing divine presence that's there all of the time, but we may be blocking out at that moment. Number 2, we've decided it's just too difficult to do. So what have you got your mind set upon? Like, well, in the Gospel of John, 5th chapter, starting with the 2nd verse, Jesus comes into Bethesda, and there's a pool there near the sheep gate in Bethesda. And it's a healing center. People come in, and they believe that when the wind stirs up the water, the first person who gets in the water is healed. So there's a guy who's been laying there on a mat, we're told, for 38 years. And, Jesus is walking around with people, and he says to the guy, do you want to be healed? Now, if a manifestation of Jesus came to you and said, do you want to be healed, what would be your answer? Yeah. Well, this guy's saying, well, you see, I can't get up on my own to get in water, and so when the wind comes through, I just, if somebody were just here to pick me up and put me into the water, here he is, he hasn't really thought this thing through very well, has he? And yet so many of us, it's like, well, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be prosperous? Do you want to be whatever it is, whatever say that your dream job would be. We start to come up with excuses against it rather than, what Jesus said to him after he's rattling off these excuses is, okay, listen to me very carefully. Stand up, pick up your mat, and go. And he does. Number 3, we stalk negativity. And of course, this is a common, this is a common planning process, in the world. It's like, okay, what's the best scenario? But what's the worst case scenario? Let's think this thing through. Well, here again, whatever we focus on expands. So, if we're preparing for the worst, we have to be careful that we don't put too much energy into it. It's like, okay, I've got a plan B, but what's your plan A? Number 4 is we think we've got it. Once we think we've got something figured out, we kind of lock out the other ideas, the other possibilities that might be there. You come up with a label, or you define something, and then you just don't go back and revisit it, perhaps. Number 5, we haven't practiced. Here again, intellectual exercise, like we say with the unity principle of deed. It's like, are we actually applying these principles? So, we have the power to change our thoughts, change our feelings, and change our life. When a thought goes running off, can we arrest it? Now, one thing you need to know is part of us being a spiritual being, having a human experience, is that to have this human experience, we need to create something, so we create this thing called our ego. And our ego takes whatever it is we believe and runs with it. So if we decided that we're going to do a particular thing and run with it, the ego does that. But then when we change our mind about who we want to be, the ego inside of us will argue with us. Well, wait a minute, we can't do that. It's like when Carla and I decided, when we stepped out to do seminars and got so involved with unity. Here I was, a radio TV journalist in Chicago. It's like, I can't give up my job and do that. And so when you start to hear that inner dialogue, if you recognize that it's just, okay, wait a minute, ego, you don't need to be scared because this new way of being is going to be so much better than our old way. You don't need to be arguing that we need to stay in our old way of being. Number 6, the mind is so powerful. It can create failure. Essentially, here again, like the ego, we set up, our mind is so powerful we can actually create something that we believe is more powerful than us. Okay, everybody take a deep breath. Yeah. So, Pam Grout writes, that's why it is essential when doing these 9 experiments to suspend judgment long enough to believe that they'll actually work. Because if you're convinced they're not going to work, that's the result you'll get. Now, the title of the book, E squared, actually comes from the mass energy equivalence, E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass multiplied by the speed of light. I don't fully understand it, but if you jump into Wikipedia, it gets mass equals mass dash energy equivalence. It explains it all in there. So quantum physics says that we're all made up of vibrating energy. Everything around us is made up of vibrating energy. So we do have an ability to change it through our thoughts, through our feeling, through our spoken word. Now, Jesus Christ was very good at this. I mean, you read the 4 Gospels, you see, Jesus manifesting energy, healing the sick, creating money, or like when Peter needed to pay the taxes, he told Peter what to do. Peter was a fisherman, says, go fish. And sure enough, the fish has a gold coin in its mouth, which is symbolic of the idea that we need to follow through so that the money is there. The Gospel of John, 14th chapter, 12th verse. Speaking as the divine presence, Jesus says, very truly I tell you, the one who believes in the divine presence will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it. So do you really believe that? This field of potentiality can respond instantly, but a lot of times, here again, our belief is this is going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of space. So if you're willing, are you willing to prove that your past experiences may have been wrong? I know Carla and I, over the years, have recognized how many things we learned from our parents, and both Carla and I have greatly respected our fathers, but over time we recognized, whoa, wait a minute, okay, that was his way of looking at the world. Is this really the way I want to live my life as well? So, when Carla and I came here, we came with an intention, and that was for each of us as individuals to prosper, and for this congregation to prosper. And that's why I'm excited about us walking through this book. So for this week, read from the beginning through page 26. Next week's lesson, Sunday lesson, will be on chapter 1, which is called Experiment 1, The Dude Abides. So, in the book, Pam Grout says, ask yourself, are you a creative person? Are you a creative person? If you don't think you're a creative person, I've got good news for you. If you are breathing right now, you are a creative person. Each one of you has gifts, passions, and talents that you do better than anyone else. So relax. What if you were able to do what it is you love to do every day of your life? So remember earlier when I said if we convince ourselves that this is the way it always has to be, it'll be that way? Our closing video is from Steve Hartman of the CBS Evening News about a group of women who recognized they needed to give up their low expectations.
Intensity, 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 desire, heart, gut.
Since 2011,
Lady!
the Climax Fisher High School Lady Knights have been on a streak,
Rip through!
booting and bobbling their way into the record books.
Oh.
This team from western Minnesota
Pitch it!
somehow strung together 84 straight losses.
Down belly!
That's 4 straight years of ridicule.
People always make fun of you.
It's honestly embarrassing to lose that many games.
We lost a game, it's 90-3. But those kids played like it's 5-5.
Jonathan Vanish is their coach.
You're impressed with them?
Absolutely. They're going to be in there.
Jonathan says a few girls have quit, but the ones that remain are more determined than ever to turn this team around.
See if they can make an outside shot.
Which is why it was so heartening to see what happened last month. In their game against Bagley High School, the Climax Fisher Lady Knights, in white, got off to one of their best starts in recent memory. At halftime, they were actually leading by a point.
I just felt like, wow, we are in this.
And the crowd was getting into it, which made it even better. Really in the zone.
And then things went really wrong.
Really wrong, yeah.
Unfortunately, in the second half, they got in major foul trouble.
Oh my God!
One by one, their seniors fouled out of the game. All of them. Before it was over, the juniors would be gone too. In fact, for the last 3 minutes, they only had 3 girls left. 2 sophomores and a freshman. The most inexperienced players on the losingest team in the state.
Are you telling them we can win this?
Well,
You didn't want to lie to them.
I don't think I used that term. I said, but you continue working to the end.
And that's really all their coach was expecting. A valiant effort. Can't win 3-on-5. In fact, they didn't score once from the field. But they did play stellar defense. And when they did get the ball, they were able to draw some fouls. And when they did draw those fouls, they made those free throws. Enough of them that when the buzzer sounded, the Lady Knights of Climax Fisher were on a new streak.
We were all hugging and crying and screaming our heads off.
It's probably the best moment of my life.
And whether they ever win another game or not, they will never be the same team again.
You kind of learn, no matter what people say about you, if you keep putting in time and effort, that it will pay off.
And there's a lesson that will last a lot longer than a basketball season. Steve Hartman, on the road, in Climax, Minnesota.
From the Gospel of John, 5th chapter. When Jesus saw him and knew that he had been lying there for 38 years, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to pick me up and put me into the water when the wind blows." Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your mat and walk." And at once the man was healed. He took up his mat and walked away. And may you always be open to God's guidance and grace.